This review focuses on a council planning application for additional sixth form classes. And the key document for us is the transport assessment, because that is where the operational transport case is made. The travel plan matters, but mainly as supporting context after we understand whether the added demand can be accommodated on the network, at the site access, and within the school grounds. Start with the site itself, how it is accessed, and which surrounding roads and junctions carry school-related movements today. What matters in a planning review is not just the red line boundary, but the wider network that students, staff, parents, and service vehicles actually use. Baseline conditions usually turn on peak school period activity, nearby junction sensitivity, and whether there are existing constraints around arrival and departure times. You also want a clear picture of pedestrian routes, cycle access, and public transport connections, because the starting transport context shapes how credible the later impact conclusions really are. The core question is how many additional trips the extra sixth form intake is expected to generate, and whether those trips materially change existing peak conditions. For students 16 years or older, the demand profile can differ from lower year groups because travel behavior is often more independent and may lean more heavily on walking, cycling, or bus use where those options are realistic. The review point is whether the report uses reasonable mode split assumptions and whether those assumptions reflect the site's actual accessibility rather than optimistic mitigation-led forecasting. You then look at timing. School and network impacts are rarely spread evenly, so the AM and PM peaks need to be tested where added arrivals or departures could overlap with existing pressure. Distribution matters too, because even a modest uplift can be relevant if trips load onto already sensitive approaches, constrained junctions, or access points with little spare capacity. So the transport assessment should not just state that demand is low. It should show where trips go, when they occur, and why the resulting pattern does or does not create planning concern. Once trip generation is understood, the next step is operational impact. Which nearby links, junctions, and access points are most exposed to the added demand? On a school site, access performance is often as important as wider network modeling, because short-duration congestion at the gate can drive practical planning concerns even where highway capacity impacts are limited. Pickup and drop-off arrangements deserve close attention, especially if the additional cohort changes the balance between escorted trips and more independent student travel. The planning test is whether the evidence points to severe residual cumulative impacts, unsafe operation, or unmanaged overspill, rather than simply a noticeable increase in activity. If the report shows that junction effects are modest, access continues to operate acceptably, and any extra school period pressure remains within manageable bounds, that usually weighs against a material highway objection. But if conclusions rely on broad assertions without clear evidence on queuing, turning movements, or school front management, that is where a transport reviewer should probe further. Parking and servicing should be reviewed as operational issues, not side notes, because even a small expansion can expose pinch points inside a constrained school site. End with an avatar to keep the human connection. It builds trust and makes the video feel guided, not like a system talking at you. That's it! Servicing also matters if deliveries, refuse collection, or maintenance movements conflict with pupil activity or share tight internal routes. For pedestrians and cyclists, the key issue is whether routes are direct, legible, and safely separated enough to support the mode assumptions used elsewhere in the assessment. Taken together, parking, servicing, and internal circulation help show whether the proposal works as a managed transport environment rather than only as a set of highway model outputs. The travel plan sits in a supporting role here. It helps frame how sustainable travel will be encouraged, but it does not replace the need for a sound transport assessment. For planning review, the useful questions are whether the measures are proportionate, whether monitoring and coordination are credible, and whether the plan aligns with the demand assumptions already tested. In other words, the travel plan can support better outcomes, but it should not be carrying the weight of unresolved access, parking, or highway capacity issues. So treat it as useful mitigation context and good practice, while keeping the main planning judgment anchored in the transport assessment's evidence on actual impact. For a transport assessment associate, the main takeaway is straightforward. The proposal stands or falls on whether the transport assessment evidences acceptable effects on demand, access, and network operation. Keep your review anchored in the essentials: trip generation, distribution, junction and access performance, parking and servicing, and safe movement on and around the site. If those points are robustly evidenced and residual impacts remain acceptable, the transport case is likely to support the application. If not, that is where further clarification or mitigation should be sought before planning conclusions are settled. Use the travel plan to strengthen the picture, not to define it. The core planning judgment still comes from the transport evidence. That gives you a concise framework for reviewing this proposal quickly and on the issues most likely to matter to the Council.